All right. Now we are in part three of the Undeveloped Next Generation episodes thing. A sequel to Charlie X, which, oh yeah, that's right. They don't actually tell us anything else. This was the guy who was empowered by the Thasians. And, well, there's not really a huge amount we actually know about him. Looks like a very immature individual, but he has exceptional powers. Not exactly godlike powers, mind you, but powers enough to be a major problem. Like, you can shoot him with a phaser and it'll actually do something. But if he sees you pull the phaser, he could use his powers to break the phaser so you can't use it. And of course, him being a general jerk, he's not willing to use his powers in a shall we say, responsible manner, which was the core of the conflict in the Charlie X episode. Charlie was being returned to live with fellow humans by the Thasians who had been, well, let's see. What do we know about the Thasians? Oh, yeah, that's right. They're not humanoids. They're an energy race that does, whatever stuff, has powers, I guess. Now, this is one of those things where logically this race still exists in TNG era. So the idea of revisiting the race in TNG era, there's an argument there. You don't necessarily need Charlie to be part of that story, but um, having someone from TNG era interact with the Thasians and perhaps a human who had been empowered by them, or maybe some other race. That's an interesting story concept because, like, the entire point with the Charlie story was that the Thasians had try, tried to help him, and he went power mad. Him using his powers to try to force everyone to be his servants. That's not what the Thasians had been planning. So, but yeah, the Charlie X episode, Charlie go be nuts and falls in love with Janice Rand, which I mean, not exactly surprising, but sure. Oh, this is something interesting. Moving the face from some random crew woman and turning Yeoman Lawton into an iguana. Yeah. Um, Interesting assortment of powers. Again, the Thasians are one of those races that you could uh, categorize as godlike aliens. because of just how immense their powers are. But it's beings you can still fight, much like that the supposed god being from the one TOS movie that gets shot with the disruptor cannons of a bird of prey and seemingly dies in the process. It is a being of immense power, but not indestructible. Not in, well, it can die, but it's not necessarily easy to kill. And of course, longevity, yeah. Okay. Anyways, so that was one idea. Chekhov's stories. So in TNG, we saw both Scotty and DeForest Kelly. It honestly was pretty good, both stories they did with them. Now, passed around some ideas for Chekhov to make a reappearance. Thing is, apparently in TNG, they had certain rules that the people submitting scripts had to follow, or their idea just wouldn't get used at all. One of those rules was the TNG crew would not be time traveling to the TOS era in order to have hijinks with the TOS crew or members of the TOS crew, or, not necessarily even meeting the crew of the Enterprise in the past, but, stuff like that. Realistically, I do like this for the idea of avoiding having the issue of temporal paradoxes. In generations, that does happen in a very limited manner, with the temporal paradox being something that had already happened before the Enterprise crew got there, and thus wasn't their creation, which honestly actually worked out pretty well. But that was one of those things where you have a reason for it being there that's been, reasonably well thought out. Now, the problem they had with the Chekhov ideas is that they just hadn't thought of one yet. Because, like, one, yes, in theory, you could have Chekhov show up, but how and why? Now, one of these ideas here was to have Chekhov show up basically as an NPC ally that's not, that's more or less an illusion, which, okay, that idea kind of works, but is it, it's kind of like a gimmick plot idea. And, if you were to use that in a TTRPG thing, it would be a rather gimmicky thing in a TTRPG too. But if the story was right and it made sense for the story, then you could do that and people would like it. Now, the idea of having like a descendant of Chekhov who looks nearly identical to Chekhov, eh, kind of works. It's not you know, particularly creative idea, but it does kind of sort of work. And then you have the whole thing of how would you use that character though? Because again, it's like it's not necessarily the same person because you have people who are a lot like their parents. Like some people will be virtually identical to their parents. And some people will be very, very different from their parents. And in Chekhov's case, maybe like one of the things that came up in a previous one of these treatments is the idea that one of the descendants would just be a villain when they're uh, and causing problems with the same sort of powers that their parent had. Well, not powers, but abilities. Well, okay, sure. Anyway, though, so what are we going with here? Next one here is like the whole like paranoia thing, which yes, but um, anyways, now the idea here that maybe Chekhov, who had been a prisoner of war in some foreign power for a long time, and has this great resentment for the fact that he was a prisoner of war being tortured for years. You know, um, there's stuff you can do with an idea like that. I wouldn't bother using Chekhov for that if I were writing a TTRPG, but that's a trope you could use for a story. It's not bad inherently. It's just, you know, something to use very carefully and only when it actually works for the story you're trying to tell. Because if it doesn't work right for the story, then, well, it's one of those plot devices that if it's not used right, it doesn't, it just hurts the story. All right, let's see. Children of Light. We have no idea what that was. Crystal Skull. I can guess what that was based on the name and the whole ancient aliens, like, hey, there's this crystal skull that we can't explain. Well, the reality is, people do know how the thing was made. A lot of people talk about it as if it's impossible to make with human tools, and what they really mean is that they don't find chisel marks on it because the people who made it didn't use a chisel. Because, quite frankly, crystal like that, you wouldn't use a chisel on anyways. Very careful filing work is required. Yes, you use filing work to make ovoid inserts. Like I said, very carefully. But it does work. Takes a long time, but hey, whatever. Now, writing a plot, you'd basically just be making crap up at that point, though. I mean, if you're going to make crap up, you can go fully original fiction on that, though. You don't need to use a plot contrivance like it being related to some artifact found on Earth centuries ago. Yet another episode with related to data and lore. Yeah, sure. Now, lore finding out about LOL and trying to revive LOL is an interesting idea, though, because of the fact that LOL would have actually been someone that lore might have had reason to see as a potential ally because, young, impressionables, yada, yada, yada. Quite frankly, I don't personally like the idea of using Soon type androids. TNG focused on them way too much. But if you did use Soon type androids, it's not a particularly bad idea to go with LOL and lore as aspects of the story. Dead on my feet, don't know what that one was. Dead World! Um, this doesn't actually tell us what the story was. It just says that it's talking about the person who um, wrote the story. Okay. Well, no. The only thing we really noticed about the thing is that it was rejected as being too depressing, and The name Dead World makes me suspect that it's yet another one of those episodes where you come to this alien planet where there's obviously an alien civilization, but not the aliens who built the civilization. TNG and TOS and several other Star Treks have done that. It's not one of the most commonly seen plot aspects, though. It's more common for them to have a strangely underpopulated civilization with very few people for budget reasons, rather than having a planet that's just functionally a graveyard. But such things did exist. Well, about problem with this one is other than a dead planet, we don't really know a whole lot about it. So, all right, the derelict creature story. Some sort of space monster that uses spaceships the same way that a hermit crab would use seashells. Now, fundamentally, the idea sounds cool. However, it's a very specific kind of story direction, and you would have to be mindful of the fact that using this idea means you have to use a spaceship in your story quite a lot, possibly more than one. Oh, the other thing about this one, though, that I find to be an interesting thing to ponder is whether or not the creature that makes that uses the ship as a body is actually able to use the tech in the ship, because hermit crabs don't, shall we say, bond with the seashell they're hiding in, and will quite often find a new one solely because of the fact that um, they feel like it. And that's something that this particular story seemingly has as a plot element. And the creature is like, oh, I'm going to take over the Enterprise D because my current home is too small. Well, if I was going to use this, I would explore the idea of like, what do these have as their natural habitat? Because starships aren't part of the evolutionary cycle of any known species, in or out of universe, quite frankly. Which, of course, gives you the whole idea of like, if this isn't supposed to be on board a starship, where is it supposed to be? Hmm. That would actually be an interesting thing to explore. But again, you're making up your own story at this point. A TNG episode that involves Elvis in some way. Yeah, okay, that's an idea you could go with. Thing is, this could end up being like the Vic Fontaine thing, where, yes, it's a person who shows up in the story as a holographic character. However, the holographic character is not actually, a living person in universe. So, whatever. And it's kind of like how they had Moriarty and Sherlock Holmes and all that stuff. It's like, yes, 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 we are aware of the existence of characters outside Star Trek. Oh well, Dream Pool. How much do they actually tell us about here? Oh yeah, something, something, something. People struggling with drug addiction. Hmm, Yeah, this doesn't actually tell us anything other than the fact that it has a drug addiction uh thing to it, which, admittedly, TNG did actually have at least one episode that did, in fact, involve drug addiction in some way, like the episode with the Ornarans. That one involved drug addiction as a plot aspect. What exactly they were going to do with this that didn't do, that's so edgy that it wouldn't get produced for being too edgy? Interesting question. I don't know. Maybe one of the members of the crew was supposed to get uh, addicted to some alien drug or something. Who knows? I don't know. Well, yeah. This is one of those where the write up they have on here is really long, except that it's a write up about the reason about the people who wrote proposed the idea. I didn't actually even get around to writing it, and not actually talking about what the actual idea was. Yeah, bummer. All right, well, that's gone on long enough for today. I'm still in the ease on this article. It's going to take several more of these. I don't know. See you next time.